Right. So a few things that we're going to cover today include, first of all, we will talk about what is self-compassion and also maybe what it isn't. We'll talk about the elements of mindful self-compassion, some of the attributes, and also how perhaps self-compassion can be beneficial for us during this COVID-19 pandemic. And after the pandemic, just in everyday life. And we will also identify the ways to implement self-compassion into daily life. So I will introduce you to a couple of simple practices, self-compassion based practices, and also some mindfulness based practices. Today we will also practice meditating. If you've never meditated in your life before, actually that may be a benefit. Beginner's mind is always welcome during mindfulness meditation. So if you wish, you can give it a try, and if not, please just stay at your own comfort level. And when talking about being comfortable, Mindful Self-Compassion program is a trauma-sensitive program, meaning that I really invite you today to take responsibility for your own safety and your own comfort. So if the subject that we're talking about feels comfortable for you and you can notice how your body maybe is feeling in the moment, do you feel relaxed? Is your breathing more regular? Are your muscles a little bit softened? Maybe there's less tension in your body. So maybe that's an indicator that you're comfortable and feeling safe participating perhaps in an exercise or practice. However, if at any point you feel a sense of overwhelm, which can really manifest in many different ways, perhaps a feeling of numbness or irritability, or just a desire, I don't want to be here, I don't want to listen to this. Perhaps sometimes even tears may appear. So if at any time a practice or the discussion feels triggering or activating for you, please take care of yourself, and you may redirect your attention from the session, perhaps and looking out the window, noticing a tree outside your window, or perhaps you can just turn down the volume during the practice for a bit. You can also bring your attention to your breathing and maybe take a few deep breaths, noticing the air coming in and out of your body. So just taking some strategies to redirect your attention. The optimal learning zone is a zone of being challenged. So it's between feeling too cozy, too comfy, almost sleepy, and overwhelmed. It's a good stress, right? So perhaps you're being challenged, your attention is there, you're curious, maybe there's a little bit of tension in your muscles, but it's not in a bad way. So perhaps paying attention to those indicators in your body, your mind is more engaged as well. So that's where I'd like for us all to stay, in that zone of challenge. But it's so natural for us to go in and out of, attention, and different things may speak differently to different people. So I just want to acknowledge that. All right. So I would like to invite us all to just settle for a moment. And gosh, being on Zoom is truly a challenge for me, and maybe for some of you too. It's just that interesting space of being present in each other's absence. So maybe we can become a little bit more present for ourselves and for this session. And I'd like to invite you into the soft landing practice, just a very short meditative practice to bring our attention to this moment and to this workshop, to this discussion. Right, so now as we're all present here through the web of internet, I would like to invite you to bring your hearts and your minds truly into this chat room as well. So please make sure you're sitting comfortable, something that is supportive for you right now. If you wish, you can lay down or even stand up, whatever is supportive for you. And if you wish, you can close your eyes fully or partially, or you may just keep them open, placing a soft gaze, perhaps down on your hands and on your lap. And let's just begin simply noticing the sounds in the room that you're in right now. Just letting the sounds come to you without pushing or pulling, just noticing. And now in your mind's eye, finding your body in the room and perhaps greeting yourself with an inner smile. Inclining your awareness toward yourself as you might with a good friend. Now simply dropping your awareness into your body and noticing the physical sensations in your body right now. Perhaps there are some pleasant ones, and perhaps there are some unpleasant aches or pains, tightness, discomfort. Can you make some space for them, allowing them to be there only for this moment? And if there's discomfort, can you let your heart soften a little bit? Just become a little bit more tender, if only around the edges. Or perhaps you can give yourself some words of encouragement. It's okay, you can handle this. You got this. And finally, appreciating the effort and the good intention that brought you here, which is already in itself is an act of compassion and self-compassion. And when you're ready, opening your eyes. Right, very nice. So thank you for practicing this soft landing, which takes us to another point that I'd like to bring as we're gently softening into this practice of self-compassion. Something that I heard recently from a meditation teacher, Tara Brach, who is also a psychologist, really grabbed my attention. And what Tara said was, resilience and enlightenment involve two things: intention and attention. So think about this. What is intention? Intention is a determination to act in a certain way. The thing that you plan to do or achieve, it's an aim, it's a purpose. Intention holds a space for that which we desire. Intention holds the space for that which we desire. And intention is more than just a wish. I love this quote by Mary Beth Jensen, who in her book, Pleasure Healing, describes intention as intentions aren't fleeting thoughts or wishes, but rather they're like sacred rocket fuel, turning your good but half-baked ideas into brilliant, fully formed bullet points. Right? It's like a sacred rocket fuel. So I want you to ponder upon the next question. What is your intention for this session? Is it to learn something that maybe is helpful for yourself, for others during this pandemic or in general? Or is the intention to be kinder to yourself? Or perhaps just to take a moment for your growth? Also interesting, the paradox of intention is that if we focus too much attention on an intention, we actually risk missing out on options outside of our intention because we're too focused on one set of possibilities, right? So the invitation today that I have for you is to have an intention, but also keep an open mind, an open heart, allowing yourself to let go of judgment, allowing yourself to be open to the experience. And also just to reflect for a moment on what is attention. Attention is the act of applying the mind to something. Right? It's the act of power of carefully thinking about, listening to, or watching someone or something. Think about this. Devoting attention to something is an intimate act. When we focus and bring the power of our mind to something, it actually becomes alive and grows. So let's say when we bring our attention to things that are stressful, we truly give power to those things, right? And in the same way, when we focus our attention on the positive aspects of our lives, we're actually able to keep alive those things and grow them as well. So what's interesting to me and something that I think about quite often is that it's about the quality of attention. The quality of attention, what makes the act of paying attention supportive or disruptive to our emotional well-being. So for instance, when I'm lying down in bed trying to fall asleep, and suddenly maybe I'm noticing soreness in my throat. So one way that my attention may start traveling, well, first of all, I notice the soreness, and then maybe a worry creeps in. Oh no, am I getting sick? Did I get coronavirus? Am I going to die? You know, it can quite dramatically start snowballing. And what else is interesting, that once you have that initial thought, maybe negative thought of worry or sadness or fear, another thought comes in, or another emotion, a sense of judgment. In Buddhist psychology, they call it two arrows. The first arrow shoots your heart with that negative emotion, again, like fear, sadness, anger. But the second arrow is the arrow of judgment, and perhaps you start thinking, oh, something is wrong with me. I can't even deal with these circumstances. I can't even handle the stress. So you start beating yourself up for feeling a certain way, right? And then there's another way to bring attention to yourself and your experience. So for instance, again, I'm laying down feeling sore throat, and I notice, oh wow, this is worrying me. But rather than continuing to invest my attention into worry, how can I actually bring care and tenderness to myself while experiencing something like that? A Buddhist teacher and peace activist, Thich Nhat Hanh, recommends practicing this very tender mantra when you are experiencing a difficult emotion or a stressful feeling, perhaps, just turning toward yourself with tenderness and maybe saying to yourself, darling, I care about the suffering. So the invitation today is to begin to move our attention from being focused on judgment, like judging ourselves for not being able to cope with stress perhaps, to focusing our attention on caring for ourselves in the midst of stress. So this takes us naturally to the subject of compassion and care and what it is, right? So before we dive into what is self-compassion, let's just really explore what is compassion. What needs to happen to feel compassion? What makes a response compassionate? So you may think perhaps walking down the street and seeing a homeless person or a homeless child. What makes a response compassionate toward that person? Well, first of all, it's just a mere act of noticing that person's suffering, noticing that, wow, they're really struggling right now, right? Secondly, compassion involves recognizing that, oh, this is also a human being, or this could be me, this element of empathy, putting yourself in the shoes of this person, recognizing our shared human suffering. Right? And also compassion is something that's active. It involves some action, maybe showing kindness toward that person, whether it's giving them some food or water, or maybe just saying a word of kindness, showing perhaps support by giving a hug or just a gentle touch. And what's interesting, from Latin translation, the word compassion means to suffer with, to suffer with. So it already assumes other people. Compassion is not just feeling, it's not like empathy. It's not feeling as another person. It's feeling for another person, with another person. So the definition of compassion may be described as noticing someone else's suffering, evoking a desire to alleviate that suffering, and finally, taking some practical steps to help alleviate that suffering. So if compassion is described as that, then what is self-compassion? Well, self-compassion is that compassion turned inward, right? Noticing, first of all, really noticing, I'm struggling, I'm suffering, I'm stressed. And then evoking a desire to help in some way, alleviate that struggle, and actually doing something to help yourself. Another way to look at self-compassion may be helpful by looking at the following definition, which is provided by Dr. Kristin Neff in her work, that self-compassion involves responding in the same supportive and understanding way you would with a good friend when you have a difficult time, fail, or notice something you don't like about yourself. So truly, being self-compassionate toward yourself involves treating yourself the way you would treat a good friend. And this takes us to a next practice, a little exercise that I would like for you to try. And the exercise is called, how do I treat a friend? How do I treat a friend? So if you have a pen and paper, you can even write down some of the answers that come up for you during this practice, or you can just simply drop in and reflect on the following question. And if it's helpful for you, you can even close your eyes to, if it's more supportive for you, for your imagination and reflection. So think about various times, perhaps when you had a close friend who was struggling in some way. Perhaps they had a misfortune or failed or felt inadequate. How do you typically respond to your friend in such situation? What do you say? What tone do you use? How is your posture? How is your body in the moment? What are some of those nonverbal gestures? So just taking a moment to reflect on that. Words, tone, posture, nonverbal gestures. And now reflect on the following question. Think about various times when you were struggling in some way. You had a misfortune or failed or felt inadequate. How do you typically respond to yourself in this situation? What do you say? What tone do you use? Again, what is your body like in that moment? Your face, your shoulders, your hands. What are some of those nonverbal gestures? So finally, consider the difference between how you treat your close friend and when they are struggling, and how do you treat yourself? Did you notice a difference? And perhaps some of you have, and some of you may have noticed that, oh, I actually maybe treat my friends better than I treat myself. And just so you know, research shows that 78% of people are more compassionate toward others than they are toward themselves. Now, perhaps you notice that I'm more compassionate to myself than toward others. So you are in that small, rare percentage of 6% of people who are actually more compassionate toward themselves than toward others. And about 12% of people are about equally compassionate toward others and themselves. So this is just something to start thinking about and exploring, right? And as we're talking further about mindful self-compassion, so by definition of compassion, remember we identified it's about noticing someone's suffering, recognizing that shared humanity, and also taking some action toward helping alleviate that person's struggle. So deriving from that definition of compassion and self-compassion, self-compassion involves three components. Component of self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. And another way to look at this model of this interlaced components is that self-compassion can be described as loving, connected presence. Loving, connected presence. So let's take a closer look at each of these components. First of all, let's take a look at self-kindness. Well, self-kindness is literally being kind to ourselves and treating ourselves with care and understanding rather than harsh judgment. You can think of it as putting a supportive and gentle hand around your shoulder. Also, self-kindness means, rather than being harshly critical, when noticing personal shortcomings, we're supportive and encouraging and aim to protect ourselves from harm. Instead of attacking and beating ourselves for being inadequate, we offer ourselves warmth and unconditional acceptance. Also, self-kindness, it's an action. It involves actively soothing our physical body and comforting ourselves, comforting our emotional body. So the next, and just a point that truly the opposite of self-kindness is that sense of self-judgment and self-criticism. So when we judge ourselves harshly, when we beat ourselves up, it can actually bring a lot of internal stress and actually make things worse. Already we have a lot of external stress, enough of that, and self-criticism is a form of internal stress. So let's look at this next component of common humanity. Common humanity is really that sense of interconnectedness, and it truly is central to self-compassion. Unlike concepts like self-acceptance or self-pity, actually, self-compassion, those items, those concepts, they don't really involve other people, where self-compassion does. Being self-compassionate is about including yourself to the circle of compassion that you have for all other beings, and realizing that life is imperfect, right? And we all struggle, we all experience pains and suffering. So just reminding yourself of that. And what's interesting is that common humanity is opposite of isolation. We all suffer, but we have different flavors of suffering. And it's so easy at times of struggle or shame or stress. So easy to wanting to just hide and isolate ourselves and not talk to anybody about our struggle, thinking that it's only is happening to me. Oh, why is it happening to me? But this component of common humanity really reminds us that a lot of people are experiencing the same stresses and struggles, and especially during this pandemic. Wouldn't you say that we're in this shared experience of this shared stress and discomfort, right? And finally, mindfulness. Mindfulness is truly the root of self-compassion. It takes awareness, it takes mindfulness to recognize that, oh, I am actually struggling, I'm actually suffering. Mindfulness involves being aware of our moment-to-moment experience in a clear and balanced way. And also mindfulness avoids extremes of suppressing or running away from painful feelings. So it's rather than over-identifying with our feelings, let's say, maybe you're experiencing worry, and rather than noting that, oh, this is worry, labeling it as that, we can quite get entangled into that feeling and start having conversations with ourselves about being worried so quickly. Mind travels from something like, I don't like this feeling, I shouldn't have this feeling, something is wrong with me for having this feeling, I'm just an anxious, worried person. Quickly goes from having a feeling to that feeling sticking to us and turning, we think we are that. So mindfulness helps us to unstick, to recognize that this is just a feeling and perhaps other people are experiencing it as well. So when talking about mindfulness today, I actually wanted to bring just to bring a little bit of distinguish mindfulness from self-compassion and how it's a dance between mindfulness and self-compassion when we're truly trying to offer ourselves compassion. So think about this. Mindfulness focuses primarily on acceptance of our experience. Just having that awareness and acceptance of our experience, to where self-compassion focuses on the experiencer. It focuses on caring for the person who is experiencing something difficult, in this case, ourselves. Also, mindfulness asks, what am I experiencing right now? What am I experiencing right now? To where self-compassion asks, what do I need right now? In fact, this is a central question of self-compassion. What is that do I need right now? And we'll go back to it in just a minute. Also, mindfulness says, feel your suffering with spacious awareness. Right? And self-compassion says, be kind to yourself while you're suffering. So I just wanted to bring this up because for me it's helpful to think about mindfulness and self-compassion in those terms. So hopefully this is helpful for you as well. Something that I also would like to bring is we're talking about mindfulness. Again, mindfulness doesn't just involve paying attention to what's happening in the present moment. It actually, again, involves a certain quality of attention. Remember, as we were mentioning at the beginning, quality of accepting what's happening without being lost in judgment, good or bad. So this attitude is often described as non-resistance. And resistance refers to the struggle that occurs when we believe our moment-to-moment experience should be other than what it is. But what's interesting is that, and it's one of the sayings that we say in the mindful self-compassion program, is that what we resist persists. Just think about it when you're perhaps sitting at home and feeling just irritated by this whole coronavirus situation, and that sense of irritation, or perhaps even anxiety or grief. The more you experience it, the more you get entangled into it. The more you also maybe feel like, I don't want to feel this, I shouldn't feel this, resisting your own feelings about it. It actually can get worse, and then it actually would grow, right? So I love this idea of that we all experience pain. Truly, pain is inevitable. Anxiety at times like this is almost inevitable, or sadness, right? To grief. However, suffering is optional, and there's this equation of that pain times resistance equals suffering. Pain times resistance equals suffering. But think about this: pain times non-resistance, or pain times acceptance, equals freedom. Freedom from suffering. And I, again, to quote Tara Brach, the meditation teacher, she says that our circle of freedom as big as the things we are willing to accept into it. It's quite profound, right? Another point that I would like to bring is that when we give ourselves compassion during the times of struggle, and when we give ourselves compassion in order to feel better, like the goal of the practice of being compassionate to yourself is that, well, let me just give myself compassion and be compassionate to myself just so I can feel better, just so I don't feel these emotions. Actually, that's a hidden form of resistance, because we don't want to feel what we're feeling, right? And we want to feel something else. We want to feel better, which is such a natural way of the way our brain works and the way we as human beings work. So how can we perhaps begin giving ourselves compassion, not to feel better, but because we feel bad? Not to feel better, but because we feel bad. And the way to think about it is, when let's say a child has the flu, the mom or the dad doesn't take care of the child to make the flu go away, because he really can't. It has to work through its own process. The parent takes care of the child to comfort the child because the child has the flu, right? So it's kind of the same principle, giving ourselves compassion simply because we need it. And with mindfulness, again, what is helpful really is to really beginning our journey of exploration. What is that I'm feeling? Perhaps noticing our emotions, labeling our emotions, and again, just one of these sayings that we use in the Mindful Self-Compassion program, that what we can feel, we can heal. And the reason why it works when you're experiencing certain emotions, so your limbic system in your brain is activated. However, when you label that emotion, activating your prefrontal cortex, actually research shows that it helps bring your stress levels down. You're activating the part of your brain that is the planning, the thinking part, the rational part of the brain, rather than the emotional part of the brain. So it's really interesting how allowing yourself to feel what you need to feel and also labeling your experiences can be quite helpful and regulating in stressful times. Right, so while self-compassion includes these three components of self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness, it also has attributes or sides, you can think of it. When you really just start talking about self-compassion, if that's something maybe you've heard for the first time, it maybe sounds like something quite soft, fluffy, very feminine. And yes, there is that side to self-compassion that's a more, maybe you can think of a passive or feminine or soft side, which involves being with ourselves when we struggle. However, self-compassion also has that more masculine, active side, acting in the world, type of side. So actually, self-compassion, and we can think of it in terms of yin and yang. It has those attributes of both strength and tenderness. So let's look a little bit closer at the yin side of self-compassion. It's really being with ourselves in a tender and caring way, right? It's a tender aspect of self-compassion. It involves comforting, soothing, and validating ourselves. And then you can look at let's look at the yang side of self-compassion. It involves acting in the world in a compassionate way. It's a fierce aspect of self-compassion. It's perhaps protecting yourself from danger, providing something for yourself, motivating yourself with a compassionate voice, like a good coach. You can think of it as yin. If yin compassion is mama, then yang compassion is a mama bear. Right? So the next slide, if you have your screens available, it just kind of brings together these points of yin and yang self-compassion? Like, why does it matter? So again, the central question of self-compassion is, what do I need right now? What do I need right now? And perhaps you can, and reflect, do I need more yin self-compassion? Do I need to comfort myself? Do I need to make my body comfortable, put maybe a blanket over my shoulders, or shift a little bit, or if there's any stress in my body, how can I comfort my body or soothe my emotional body? Maybe what does that look like? Maybe giving yourself a word of encouragement or kindness, or talking to someone who is a compassionate friend in your life. Also validating your emotions or your situation, like during this pandemic, validating, like, this is really hard for me, or this is very stressful, or I feel overwhelmed sometimes, right? Really, just acknowledging what you're experiencing. And sometimes maybe you need a little bit more yang self-compassion. Do I need to protect myself? Do I actually need to wear a mask, or say no to gatherings, and actually keep social distancing? Do I need to provide for myself? Maybe do I need to eat a little bit better so my body's a little bit more resilient? And do I need to take extra vitamins? Do I need to motivate myself in some way to, again, stay healthy? Maybe to go for a walk in a safe place, or do yoga or something. So those are the things that self-compassion can address. And I would like to introduce this model, this PARK model, P-A-R-K, that just can help you to remember practicing asking yourself that question. So, perhaps pausing. P stands for pausing in the PARK model. Maybe just taking a few breaths. Right? And then A in the PARK model stands for asking yourself, what do I need right now? How often do you actually ask yourself that question, right? And then R in our model stands for reading your physical body, and also reading your emotional body. Is there tension or discomfort in your physical or emotional body? And then finally, kindly responding. And what does the kind response look like? Rather than pushing away thoughts or feelings, or rather than criticizing yourself, actually, can I give myself a word of encouragement? Can I engage into those practices of comforting and soothing and protecting and validating myself, and so forth? All right, so how about we take just maybe a 4-minute break? Just to know when our eyes have been glued to the screens, and I have an accent, so I know that can be sometimes challenging to understand. So maybe let's take it says 5 minutes on the screen. How about we take just 3 minutes and come back at 1 o'clock? Does that sound good? So if you need to get some water or stretch a little bit, and I will meet you all back in here just in 3 minutes. Or if you need to use a bio break, use the bathroom or something, right? So I'm going to step away for a minute as well. All right, welcome back, everyone. This is Vera again. So thank you for staying with us, and hopefully even this short break can sometimes be so helpful to reset your attention and your brain a little bit. All right, so I would like to spend just a little bit of time talking about just the science of self-compassion and some of the physiological underpinnings of self-criticism and self-compassion. Okay, so let's start with self-criticism. Self-criticism involves the threat defense system, and you may know it as fight, flight, or freeze, which are common trauma responses. And the threat defense system evolved so that we, when we perceive a threat, our amygdala, the part of our brain that you can think of it as a smoke alarm of the brain. So amygdala gets activated and releases cortisol and adrenaline, which are stress hormones, and we get ready to fight, flee, or freeze. And the system works well usually for protecting and threats to our physical bodies. However, nowadays, most of the threats that we face and challenge are really the challenges to our self-image and self-concept. So this response puts us in a state of chronic stress, really. So chronic stress can cause anxiety and depression, which is why habitual self-criticism is so bad for our emotional and physical well-being. So when we criticize ourselves, we're actually tapping into the body's threat defense system. The threat defense system is the quickest and most easily triggered responses among the different ways we can react to perceived danger. So think about it, with self-criticism, we are both the attacker and the attacked. So in this table on the screen, if you're able to see it, we're seeing how the stress response and what the stress response looks like when we internalize it. So self-compassion helps to downregulate the threat response. So when we are internalizing stress inwardly as in a fight mode, that's actually self-criticism. And then stress internalized in a flight mode, that's isolation. And stress internalized in a freeze mode is rumination, meaning thinking again and again and again about the same things or events, feeling stuck maybe in some way. So the three components of self-compassion correlate directly to these reactions. And therefore, self-compassion can actually help downregulate the response of our brain to the stresses like that. And on another slide, I would like to talk about just the physiological underpinnings of self-compassion. So the evolutionary advance of mammals is that mammalian young are born very immature and have a longer developmental period to adapt to their environment. So to keep infants safe during this vulnerable period, the mammalian care system evolved, which is really, some scientists call it mammalian brain, to where fight, flight, and freeze is the reptilian brain. So when the care system is activated, oxytocin, the love hormone, and endorphins, the happy hormones, are released, which helps reduce stress and increase feelings of safety and security. And self-compassion actually does exactly that. It helps us provide a sense of safety and security, and decrease our stress levels and increase this happy hormones, if you would, in our brain. So what I would like to kind of recap this is that with self-criticism, as I mentioned earlier, with self-criticism, we are both the attacker and the attacked. Right? And with self-compassion, we're both the holder and the held. And this is so profound to me, and I would like to share this very simple illustration with you, and you can practice with me if you wish. I invite you to just make a fist with one hand. Just make a fist. And really feel how that feels. It feels tight, perhaps, and comfortable if you really squeeze it. This is how stress feels in our body. This is how self-criticism feels in our body. So with self-criticism, it's a fist against the fist. We're already experiencing something difficult, and then we're beating ourselves up for it. And that's really painful, actually. With self-compassion, you can put your hand very gently and enfold your fist with the other hand, and hold yourself, hold your experience with tenderness and support. And sometimes during the day, I might just do this and remind myself that this experience of anxiety or stress or fear or sadness, it belongs, it's here. It's not going anywhere, but how can I actually support myself and hold myself with kindness while I'm struggling with something? Also, research shows and science shows that universal triggers of compassion response, what actually activates our mammalian brain, is a soothing touch, a gentle touch, and soothing vocalization. So I actually would like you to practice with me, if you wish, how giving yourself a soothing touch may actually be supportive for you, maybe, and just giving yourself that warmth of your own touch can be actually quite calming. So there are many different ways you can give yourself soothing touch, and I just invite you to try what works for you. So you can put maybe a hand on your heart if you wish. Just really noticing how that sense of giving yourself warmth through the hand, if that's supportive for you. Or perhaps putting both hands on your heart. Maybe this is something that's comforting for you. You can even gently stroke your chest. Maybe that feels nice. If you want to bring more yin and yang self-compassion, like strength and tenderness, just like I was showing with the fist in the hand, you can put your, I got this, and cover with gentleness. To me, it's like, yes, oh, like, I got this. Oh, maybe this is a helpful gesture for you. Perhaps, giving yourself soothing touch by putting a hand on your cheek. Maybe that's helpful. Or both cheeks, just holding your face. Sometimes we already do that, not even realizing we're comforting ourselves when we're experiencing certain emotions, like, embarrassment and shame. They appear right here in our face, in our cheeks, and how that may be so just soothing to do that. Also, maybe you just want to cross your arms and give yourself just a nice little squeeze and a nice little hug. Research shows that placing your hand on the bottom of your skull and the back of your neck, and sometimes you already do that, like rubbing your neck when you feel stressed, but that can feel quite supportive for some people. Now, for people who maybe have experienced abuse and maybe some trauma, some of these gestures may be not pleasant or dysregulative. So really, I invite you to find what works for you. Sometimes even gently stroking your hands, intentionally giving yourself gentle touch, that may be helpful. What I noticed now when I wash my hands a million times a day, I actually, when I wash my hands, I try to actually bring some warmth to the experience, meaning emotional warmth, like while washing my hands, rather than another day washing my hands, rather than getting stressed about it. Like, oh, can I use this as an opportunity to give myself soothing touch? And sometimes it may be just as simple as just cupping your hands and placing them on your lap. And for me, sometimes I do that during meetings, like I'm holding myself and my experience in this cup of tenderness. So maybe you can practice some of these gestures throughout the week. All right, so finally we are arriving to a practice. I was trying to just build up some of the knowledge around self-compassion and the components of self-compassion. So we can actually now try a practice. It's called self-compassion break. And this practice really involves the items that we talked today about, the components of self-compassion, the aspect of giving yourself a soothing touch, or perhaps treating yourself the way you would treat a friend. So we're going to do this practice in a little bit more formal way, like a meditation. But this can be an informal practice, and you can use it daily. Maybe it will take you a minute or 3 minutes to do it during the day, and you can use the entire practice, or you can use just parts of it that you find helpful. All right, so for this practice, I invite you to sit comfortably. And if you wish, I invite you to close your eyes fully or partially. And now I invite you to think of a situation in your life right now. Perhaps it's situation associated with the coronavirus pandemic, something that is difficult and stressful for you right now. And I invite you to think of something that is not too overwhelming, because when we are overwhelmed, we actually won't be able to learn the practice. Just something maybe on a scale from 1 to 10, it's a 5 or 6. But bring to mind a situation that really is stressful, that you can actually notice the stress or the discomfort or the sadness, whatever that may be in your body as you are bringing it to your mind. So I really invite you to imagine, maybe all the players involved in the situation, perhaps things that's been said or done. Now I invite you to notice if you feel any discomfort in your body as you're thinking about this circumstance. Perhaps there's a sense of tightness in your chest or in your throat. Maybe there is a discomfort in your belly or headache in your maybe there's discomfort in your shoulders. Maybe there's a sense of irritability in your hands or feet. So we are really bringing our mindful attention to this experience. And see if you can say to yourself now, as you acknowledge the impact the situation is having on you, maybe if you can say, this is a moment of suffering, or this is difficult, it hurts, ouch. Whatever statement makes sense for you. And next, bringing the common humanity component into this practice, see if you can say to yourself, suffering is part of life. other people feel this way too. I am not alone. We all struggle in our lives. See how giving yourself that message, see how that feels. And finally, bring a moment of self-kindness. So perhaps you can put a hand on your heart or any other soothing part of your body. And just feeling the warmth and the love of your hand really connecting with your heart. And perhaps asking yourself, what do I need right now? What do I need right now to be kind to myself? Perhaps just wishing, may I be kind to myself. May I begin accept myself just as I am. Or perhaps think if your dear friend was struggling in the way that you are, what words would you say to your friend? What tone of voice would that be? And can you turn that message inward for yourself? Giving yourself that kindness and compassion that you would give to a dear friend. And you can release your hand if you hand your hand on your chest and just sit for a moment in this experience and notice how you're feeling right now. So I actually would like to invite maybe one or two comments. If you practice this practice right now, what came up for you and what did you notice during this practice? So maybe if someone would like to unmute yourself and just share what came up for you. Be brave.
It will be very helpful for me in my work with students for sure. I already practice yoga, and this will be, it's reinforcing and comforting, but it'll be also very good imagery and some new motions and some new verbiage for kids.
Right. Thank you for sharing. And anyone who wants to share also maybe your direct experience, if you practice this. What was it like for you to, first of all, did you notice actually stress in your body? And also, what was it like for you to bring common humanity and to picture actually recognize that stress with mindfulness or giving yourself soothing touch? If anybody wants to share, maybe that.
I guess maybe sometimes we do forget that we do need that kind of touch, and being that we're not able to really be with other people, to just know that you can give yourself that self-love or that warm touch, that warm feeling, is a way that can really open your mind up to how it feels, how you've been feeling, because sometimes you don't even recognize that you are stressed or that you are feeling alone or that you are feeling some kind of way disconnected. And that kind of like brings you back to a place of connection with just everything around you, not just other people, but who you are as a person. Like, just knowing and realizing, I do need that gentle touch sometimes, and not always looking in the mirror or complaining about what I think is going on, but instead, again, accepting who I am and saying, you know what, it's okay to just simply be me.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. Right. Reflecting, I have needs. What do I need? I need a gentle touch. Right. So I just want to mention that sometimes when we begin to give ourselves compassion, few things can happen, really. Few things can happen. So we may start feeling good. We may feel nothing. Or we may start feeling bad. And this concept of why, we are starting to feel bad is actually described as a backdraft, So just imagine that, backdraft in firefighter terms is when there's a room that's on fire and you open the door and you introduce the oxygen into the room. It can just really flows out, and there may be like even an explosion of fire. Right? So imagine that our hearts have been closed, and they've been on fire with a lot of pain and ache. And when you begin to introduce that oxygen of compassion and kindness, it can really sometimes feel like quite overwhelming, and that's backdraft. And sometimes backdraft can be actually quite intense. You can really feel emotional. So there are several ways to work with backdraft, and perhaps several ways to ground yourself if you do experience that sense of overwhelm. So first of all, labeling the experience as a backdraft. Right? Again, labeling any experience when you're experiencing it actually really helps to regulate your nervous system. Also, naming the strongest emotion that you're experiencing with a kind voice. So again, thinking about the tone. What is that's been there on fire? Is it, grief, loneliness, sadness, fear? And naming it like, oh, that's grief. What's like really that quality of naming it is important. And then exploring whether emotion resides physically in your body. So is it tightness in your chest or your belly? Is it tension in your neck? Maybe in your head? Maybe there's a headache. I know for me, I experience a lot of emotions in my stomach. It just hurts, and I know, anxiety, there it comes, or overwhelm, or I start sweating. That's also a sense of feeling overwhelmed. And also redirecting your attention to a neutral focus. So perhaps I can redirect my attention into my beautiful flower plant, or bringing your attention, if you're in your body, bring attention into your feet. That can be quite helpful. It's called the soles of your feet practice. Or just, bringing attention to something that's pleasant. So even if it's a smell, it could be a smell, it could be a visual thing, it could be a touch, perhaps noticing that fuzzy blanket and how it feels, or even if you want to bring your attention, I have a glass jar, and when I hold it, I feel the coldness of the glass jar and the water, and just bringing your attention to perhaps a different anchor, a different object of attention. That can be quite regulating sometimes. Or the sounds, right? Activating different sensors that you have. So just real quick, I wanted to show you this model here. It's a wheel of emotions. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. You're welcome if you are a practitioner, mental health practitioner, or just for yourself. You can just Google it, wheel of emotions, and it shows just how at the center of it, how are the basic human emotions: happiness, sadness, disgust, fear, surprise, anger, and then how they split into additional emotions, like sadness perhaps splits into guilt, shame, loneliness, scared, fear. So this can be helpful in the process of labeling your emotions. Really, sometimes I don't have enough vocabulary to know exactly what I feel, so sometimes just looking at the wheel can be helpful. Now, when I teach mindfulness to kids, kids may not have the vocabulary or even know what some of these emotions mean, some of these words. Sometimes you can even label it as yucky, gooey, sticky, dark, or you can think of it as the weather, describe it as the weather inside of you. Is it cloudy, sunny, rainy, cold, foggy, things like that. So this may be a helpful tool for you. And also I would like to bring this another diagram to the screens if you're able to see it. So there was a research done in which participants from different cultures actually were scanned through the MRI machine, and they were invited and evoked to feel certain emotions. And what was really interesting that on this diagram you may see how certain emotions appear in different ways in our body, and like it's almost the temperature is warmer right where the emotion is happening, or maybe there's a sense of coldness. So for instance, let's say again, when you're experiencing shame, for a lot of people there is a temperature and sense of warmth like right there in their face, right? Or when you're experiencing anxiety, that may be right there in your chest, that's where the energy is focused right there. Or also when you're experiencing depression, so I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but the body in depression is actually blue. It's actually cold. And that's why we say, I feel blue. Well, you literally are blue. There's a sense of coldness in the entire body. Right. So it's really interesting for me to think how emotions truly manifest themselves in different parts of our bodies. Or anger, anger can be right here in the chest area, in the face, but also in our fists, right? So that's why people often feel like they want to punch something, because that's where the energy and the heat is being is happening right now. So just wanted to share this with you as well today. All right, so and the grounding technique, the soles of your feet practice, that can be regulating sometimes. Just as you are sitting right now in your chair, you can stand up if you wish. But just really, bring your attention all the way down to your feet. In fact, your feet are the furthest part in your body from your brain. And really feel the support of the earth under your feet. You can even close your eyes if that's more supportive. You can roll your feet on the outer edges, on the inner edges. Wiggle your toes. You can come on the tippy toes and then press maybe the heels against the ground. Rotate your feet a little bit. So as you're doing this, are you thinking of all the world problems that are happening right now? Hopefully not, right? I mean, this is just a simple attention regulation technique that actually is quite helpful, especially when experiencing anxiety or anger. Just bringing your attention down to your feet, and also you can just take mindful walks, and as you walk, really paying attention as your feet land on the ground, how they touch the ground and move. All right, so I think we are really getting close to the end. We maybe have just another minute or so. So I'm just to recap, just so you know, self-compassion in general is linked to emotional well-being. And there's so much research now done around self-compassion. There are actually almost 3,000 articles of research about it. Self-compassion is linked to reductions in negative mind states such as anxiety, depression, stress, rumination, thought suppression, perfectionism, and shame. And it also is linked to increases in positive mind states such as life satisfaction, happiness, connectedness, optimism, curiosity, and presence. So with that said, I think there are so many benefits to practicing self-compassion. Today we just covered really the surface, just what it is and maybe what it isn't. And maybe the self-compassion break is something you can practice, or some of the mindfulness techniques like bringing the attention to the soles of your feet. But I really invite you to further exploring this resource if it grabbed your attention. Some of the resources on the screen I'm going to bring up. First, you can actually you can practice the entire program of self-compassion through this workbook. It's called the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. I think it's like $14 on Amazon. It's a very helpful tool for yourself to self-guide yourself, but you can also use it with your clients. There's also a book called Self-Compassion for Teens, and it's specifically designed to work with teenagers. You can visit Dr. Kristin Neff's website, selfcompassion.org, or Chris Germer's website as well, chrisgermer.com. The book that I have, and in fact, it's available for purchase. I am a trained teacher in mindful self-compassion, but even if you're not, you can still buy a book. It's called Teaching Mindful Self-Compassion Program. And this is an amazing tool. It has tons of wonderful information and techniques that you can use as well. All right, so I do want to invite at least maybe to spend a couple of minutes if there are any questions or comments today, or if you found this information helpful, or what stood out for you. If anyone would like to share, I really would appreciate it. Anybody?
So Vera, one of the questions we had was that I think the original PowerPoint slide, you might have updated it over the past week. Can we get a copy of this
I did.
from today?
I will. Yes, I will. I did update it today actually. So sorry, I'll switch on you all.
Yeah, but if you just send it to me, I'll upload it to the Google Drive.
Will do. Sounds good. Anything else? Any other comments or questions? Or do we have anything in the chat box? I don't know.
It was wonderful.
Thank you. Glad you liked it. Anything in the chat box, Sarah?
I don't see questions coming up. A lot of people are saying that they really enjoyed it, and we're really grateful for the experience.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you all so much for being with us today, and hopefully you really have peaceful evening or moment. You know, even sometimes one peaceful moment makes such a big difference, and just giving yourself care and kindness and compassion in the midst of it all can be really life-changing. Just one moment of self-compassion can be so supportive sometimes. So I hope you have a good evening and afternoon, and take care.